The room went quiet so fast it felt like someone had pulled the plug on sound, and I knew before I even looked at my son that something had gone wrong. Because Marcus froze with his fork halfway to his mouth, his shoulders stiff, his eyes dropping to his plate like he'd been caught doing something shameful. And then my sister leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine with that familiar, confident smirk, and said, "I'm just saying, kids raised by single parents tend to struggle. Marcus seems a little behind. Maybe if he had a stronger father figure." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the table. I just asked calmly, "What did you just say?" Because I didn't want my son to hear anger. But Lauren never backed down. She never had to. She shrugged and said she was only being honest, only concerned. And before I could respond, her husband chimed in without looking up from his plate, talking about statistics and structure like my child was a research project instead of a human being. And then my mother nodded along, dabbing her lips with her napkin, saying they just wanted what was best for Marcus because he seemed so withdrawn compared to Lauren's kids. I looked at my nephew and niece, younger than Marcus, glued to their tablets at the table, something I never allowed. But apparently, screens and silence counted as success if they came from a two-parent household. I reached over and squeezed Marcus's shoulder, feeling him shrink under my hand, and I told them firmly that he was doing just fine, that he was on the honor roll, that he played piano, that he volunteered at an animal shelter every weekend. But Lauren raised an eyebrow and casually mentioned that Mom had told her I couldn't afford to take Marcus on vacation this year, unlike her 3-week European trip, and that's when Marcus pushed his plate away and whispered, "I'm not hungry." That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a switch flipping into place. I realized I had spent 4 years swallowing comments, 4 years smiling through helpful advice, 4 years teaching my son to be respectful while allowing grown adults to chip away at his sense of worth, and I understood then that my silence hadn't been kindness, it had been permission. So I opened my purse and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying for days, the one I almost left in the car, the one filled with truths I'd been protecting them from, and I placed it gently on the table and asked, "They need what? Exactly?" Lauren barely glanced at it and kept talking about stability and financial security, and that's when I opened the folder and said quietly, "Your mortgage is 3 months overdue." Her wine glass stopped mid-swirl. I slid the first paper across the table and explained that the foreclosure notice arrived last Tuesday, that the total arrears were just over $17,000, and I watched David's face drain of color as he stammered, asking how I knew, and that's when I reminded him that I wasn't a teller at the bank. I was a regional loan officer, and had been for 2 years. The room shifted. My father accused me of exposing private matters. My mother gasped. Lauren tried to call it temporary. But I kept going, laying out the timeline, explaining that David had been unemployed for 6 months, that their savings ran out in August, that they were living on credit cards, and that the bank would take possession of the house in less than 45 days if nothing changed. And when my mother asked if it was true, Lauren couldn't answer, because the truth has a way of stealing your voice. Then I pulled out another document and asked if she knew who had been paying part of her mortgage for the past 3 months, and when her eyes widened, I told her it had been me, quietly transferring money every month because despite everything, I didn't want my niece and nephew to lose their home, because I still believed kindness might eventually be met with respect. And Marcus looked up at me then, confusion and something like pride flickering across his face. But kindness without boundaries is just self-betrayal, and I told them the last payment had already been reversed, that the transfers were stopped, and that I was done subsidizing disrespect. And when Lauren whispered that I couldn't do that, I calmly replied that I already had. And the silence that followed was heavier than any shouting ever could be. My father slammed his hand on the table and called it vindictive, and that's when my voice finally rose, not in anger, but in clarity, because I told them this wasn't revenge, it was protection. that I was done letting my child absorb their arrogance, done teaching him that love means tolerating people who make you feel small, and when Lauren accused me of letting them lose their house over a few comments, I reminded her that for 4 years she had implied my son was damaged because his father died, and that last month he had asked me if it was his fault. The room went completely still. I stood up, took Marcus's hand, and told them something they never expected to hear, that I owned my apartment outright, that I made 6 figures, that I could have bought a house twice the size of theirs, but chose not to, because I wanted my son to grow up understanding effort, humility, and gratitude, not entitlement, and that the withdrawn child they were so worried about had just earned a full scholarship into an accelerated academy based on academic performance and an essay about grief and resilience. I asked them what Marcus really needed, and then I answered my own question. He needed adults who saw his value instead of highlighting his loss, people who understood that one present, loving parent was better than 2 judgmental ones obsessed with appearances. And as Lauren cried, and my parents sat frozen, I told them they had 45 days to figure out their finances, but they would no longer be borrowing my money, my patience, or my silence. As Marcus and I walked toward the door, my mother warned me I was making a mistake, and I turned back one last time and told her the real mistake had been teaching my child that family means enduring disrespect, because family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down to feel superior. And when we got into the car, Marcus looked at me and said quietly, "That was really cool, Mom," and for the first time in years, my chest felt light. That night, eating pizza on the couch in our small paid-off apartment, I realized something simple and powerful. I had spent years trying to prove I was enough, when I'd been enough all along. And the moment I chose my child's dignity over their approval, I finally understood that some doors are meant to be closed, especially when protecting the people who matter most.